Hey y'all, Austin here with Outer World Media. Welcome back to another book review, guys. This is Fellowship Read number 2 with Hyden Reed, somebody that I really do consider a friend at this point. So I know he was super excited about reading this book, which in turn made me excited, and I was already excited to read this one. This is a classic, a Western classic, and while there are quite a few out there, there's just not as many as I think there ought to be. But nonetheless, let's get into it, guys. What are we talking about today? What book am I reviewing? I'm talking about Charles Portis's True Grit. I believe this came out in, if I'm not mistaken, I have some notes here, 1968. This is somewhat of a shorter story, if you will. This was turned into a movie that starred John Wayne and then ended up getting a remake, I think, in like 2010 or 2011, if I'm not mistaken. That had Matt Damon and Jeff Bridges. The original one with John Wayne won him, that was an Oscar or something like that. I don't keep track of those. And then I know that the remake was also very well received critically, not just from the critics, but also from the audience. So, having that knowledge going into this book definitely helped and set the expectations high. As I go throughout this review, I will kind of let you know if those expectations were met or not. So let's get into it. What is True Grit by Charles Portis? What is it about? So this is a story about, and again, do apologize, I have my notes here. This is a story about Maddie Ross. She's a 14-year-old, kind of in the South. This story, for the most part, the beginning takes place in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Again, Maddie is a 14-year-old, but she's not an average 14-year-old, especially compared to today's, teenagers. If you look at, children back then versus now, not delving into it too much or trying to sound like an old man, people just expected, children back in those days, I think, to help out more on the farm and ranches and whatnot and help defend against possible Indian raids, bandits, stuff like that. So it's not a big surprise, I should say, to see that Maddie is very mature for her age, but it is at the same time because, again, even by 14-year-old standards back then, she is very, very well spoken. She is has knowledge beyond her years. Let's just say that, again, the story again takes place mostly in Fort Smith in Arkansas, starting off. So what kind of leads up in this story is that Maddie's dad takes on a hired hand. He seems very helpful, seems, kind of a little different, if you will, as far as just his attitude towards people. But Maddie's dad takes kind of pity on him and whatnot, and so hires him on. And this is all told from Maddie's perspective. When this story, as you read it, she's kind of, as Hyden Reed said, she's kind of an old spinster thinking back and recollecting about what kind of led up to this and then what happened after a certain event. So again, Maddie's dad hires this guy on, and then he ends up going to Fort Smith to sell some stock as well as pick up some horses and whatnot. And Maddie says in the beginning of this book, my dad always carried two gold, I think they were coins or nuggets. I think they were nuggets, two gold nuggets. They might have been coins. I do apologize. I think they were coins if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check this. Yeah, I think it was coins. If I'm not mistaken, they were coins. But he always kept two gold coins on him. And when he was going to Fort Smith, he also had $150 on him. So we find out that the man who they hired, whose name was Tom Cheney, he ends up getting drunk one night in Fort Smith. He ends up losing all his money while gambling. He ends up going back to the room that Maddie's father and him were sharing. He ends up getting his gun, saying, "I'm going to go collect what is mine. They stole from me." And so Maddie's dad, trying to be respectable citizen as well as look after Tom Cheney, because he did hire him on. So anything that Tom does kind of reflects him plus his business. And so he tries to stop Tom, talks some sense into him, and Tom ends up shooting him there on site, there in the middle of the street. He ends up robbing Maddie's dad of these 2 gold coins as well as the $150. I believe he takes, if I'm not mistaken, a couple horses, ends up stealing them out of the local stable and whatnot. And so Maddie and her family here get wind of this, and so Maddie ends up going to Fort Smith to lay eyes on the body, confirm that it's her dad, as well as she has some ulterior motives that she is trying to see happen. So we end up picking up the story from there with Maddie getting to Fort Smith with kind of the other local farmhand and whatnot. So Maddie goes in. She kind of, again, you could tell, I think even everybody else in the story kind of tell there's something a little off with her. Just the way she's acting. She's cool-headed and whatnot. She's not acting like a 14-year-old you think would normally when they especially see a dead family member, especially, their father. So Maddie ends up staying there at Fort Smith, Arkansas, where she ends up trying to find somebody to seek justice, to someone to go out and chase Tom Chaney down and bring him to justice. So she ends up getting word about some local marshals that are there for a hanging and whatnot. So she goes to this, and while there, she hears of another court case and that there will be more marshals there, and hears about a particular marshal named Rooster Cogburn. So she ends up going to this local court case and whatnot, where she ends up seeing Rooster for the first time, and ends up trying to convince Rooster, hey, I will pay you. Please go after this man. He killed my father. Not in cold blood, but just kind of in a drunken stupor and in the heat of the moment. And I want him brought to justice. Well, she also runs across I believe it was a Texas Ranger while she's there in Fort Smith. And he kind of tells Maddie, I've been chasing this guy for quite a long time. I need to find him. I've spent years doing this. I've come this far and whatnot. So the point of the story is that Maddie is trying to get Tom Chaney and bring him to justice, but she's not the only one trying to do it. So, and again, that's as much as I'm going to go into it because I don't want to spoil a whole lot or tell you a whole lot about this outside of that. Just kind of the setup for this. Again, this is a very short, concise story. And if you watch, I'm going to tag Hide and Read below. Go watch his review. He does a great job kind of delving into this. He always does a great job with his reviews, especially on these fellowship, book reviews that we've done. Again, this is a story, and again, Hide and Read spells out best, it's defining the title, True Grit. What is true grit? Is it somebody who steps up when craps hit the fan, or is it somebody who's kind of like a knight year round, in bright and shiny armor? Again, this is a really good kind of gritty Western, if you will. While I didn't enjoy some of the pacing, and I told Hide and Read this, I just wish there was some more interaction, some more conversation with Rooster Cogburn in this. And he had a great point. Well, there's quite a bit of action. You can't really have a whole lot of talking when most of the story is action. And I agree. There is more action in this book than there are in some Westerns by Louis L'Amour that I've read. Again, it is a dark, I guess that's the best way to say it. It's kind of a dark and gritty story. This is a very, very down-to-earth Western and whatnot. So, again, do I think you should read this book? Yes, I think you should. While it wasn't my favorite Western, this definitely was a solid entry. This is one, again, I'm super happy that I finally have read this and reviewed it and whatnot for the channel. If you are a fan of Westerns, I think that this is something that you will like. Kind of getting into the questions now because some of the stuff I want to say is going to answer these questions. So me and Hide and Read, we exchanged some questions and whatnot. I sent him a couple more than what he sent me, but that's fine. I had a couple more questions for him about the story than he did for me. So let's get into it. Question number 1. Does this Western remind you of any other books or movies in the genre or possibly outside of the Western genre? Well, that's a good question. Initially when he sent me that question, my mind went straight to Ride the River by Louis L'Amour. I had just read Ride the River right before starting this, probably a couple weeks before starting True Grit. And while they are similar, their focus around a teenage girl and whatnot, I think that Maddie was more of a well-grounded character and whatnot. I think she was definitely wise beyond her years, and that's outside of that and just the kind of adventure she goes on. That kind of makes me think of that. But it's going to sound weird, but just kind of how gritty this story was and kind of just how realistic it felt to me. I want to compare it to the Sister Brothers. Again, I don't know why. There's just something about those two. If you were to read them back to back, they kind of just, I don't know, they just kind of feel the same. I think it's the idea of going after someone with money involved and whatnot. Again, that's what I want to compare this to. I think this is a cross kind of between Ride the River and the Sister Brothers, and that's what this is making me think of. Again, and now that I think about it, it makes me really enjoy this book even more looking back at it now that I see that that's kind of what this feels like, again, is a combination of those two. Next question. Do you think the story is realistic / possible? I think I answered it in answering question number one. I do. I think this is a realistic story. I think this is very down to earth. There's some plot twists. I don't want to say plot twists. There's some twists that happen, some stuff that I didn't expect to happen later on in the story that seem very, very, realistic. Just with the nature of people and just the idea of greed and what it can do to you, or the idea of passion and drive and striving to accomplish something or do something for so long that you're not willing to let anything stop it from happening or you achieving that goal. I think this is very realistic and possible. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if this had actually happened back in the Old West in the 1800s. I really wouldn't be surprised. Question number 3 and the last one. What was the grittiest part of the book? And I can't really answer, I guess I can, because there's two things that I think are kind of the grittiest part of the story. But I would probably, the grittiest part, in my opinion, would have to be just Rooster Cogburn and the fact that, in this, and I do apologize, this might be a slight spoiler. I do apologize, but I need to answer the question. The man asked it. The grittiest part, in my opinion, was kind of the haggling that happened between Maddie and Rooster, because Maddie wanted to pay him a set amount, and he's like, no, I got to go out. I got to go into this no man land country and find this guy. I'm not taking any less than this. And so Maddie agrees to pay him. She kind of pays him, half up front and whatnot. And then Rooster ends up siding with this Texas Ranger saying, hey, I'll work with you. And Maddie's saying, no, don't do that. And he's like, I'm sorry, I'm going to do what I want to do. And she goes, well, I want my money back. And he says, I'm sorry, I've spent it. Like, I don't know what you want from me, kind of thing. And I think that's probably, in my opinion, the grittiest part. While it's not, down and dirty, it's just the reality of it that, people can go back on their word and whatnot, or change things to make it work better for them. Again, I don't know why. That's just the big one that's coming to my mind. That's the grittiest part about this. It's just the interaction between people and bartering. And, back in the old days, you took a person, a man's word was a man's word. That was what he lived by. And just the fact that Rooster didn't necessarily live by that, and the fact that, there's some information that you find out about him that kind of, you see why he kind of is the way he is and whatnot. Again, I think Rooster Cogburn overall has to be the grittiest part of this book, and he has to be my favorite character. While I don't, necessarily agree with everything that he does in this book, I think Rooster Cogburn is definitely the grittiest part of True Grit. But again, guys, that's going to be my review for this. Should you pick it up? Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but yes, I think you should. If you've been on the fence, if you come across a copy, if you're kind of wanting to get into Westerns, if you're wanting to read a classic that's not necessarily, considered in the typical classic section, I would pick up True Grit. Again, a pretty short, concise, straight to the punch, story, quite a bit of action. Again, pick it up. This is a very, very good story, down to earth, realistic. Again, pick it up. And as always, I want to thank Hide and Read for doing a fellowship read with me and whatnot. I'm sorry this video is posting a day later than what I had initially planned. So, again, I do apologize, but thank you as always, Hide and Read. And I will see you guys next time. Y'all have a good one.